My family laughed when I said I'd move out after years of abuse. Now they're calling daily because they finally need the son they drove away. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, my family treated me like the problem child. It didn't matter what happened. If something went wrong, the finger was always pointed at me. If a glass broke, it was my fault. If my brother Ethan got bad grades, I must have distracted him. Even when my parents argued, somehow it became about me being ungrateful or disrespectful. I learned early that in our house, truth didn't matter. What mattered was keeping peace, and peace usually meant keeping me quiet. My mother had this way of twisting words that made me question my own memory. She'd say things like, "You always ruin the mood," or "Why can't you be more like your brother?" Ethan was her pride. Charming, funny, the one who could do no wrong. Every report card of his was celebrated with a family dinner, while mine earned a lecture about not trying hard enough. My dad rarely stepped in. He'd just sit there in silence, pretending to read the paper while Mom tore into me. Like if he didn't move, he wouldn't have to choose sides. I used to think maybe I deserved it. Maybe I really was difficult. But as I got older, I started noticing patterns. Ethan could lie, break rules, even steal money once. And Mom would laugh it off, saying, "Boys make mistakes." But when I forgot to take out the trash, it turned into a family meeting about how irresponsible I was. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what made me so easy to hate. Sometimes I'd imagine what life would feel like without all the shouting. No one calling me useless, no one making me feel small. It was a dangerous thought, but it stayed with me. Maybe one day, I'd find out what peace actually sounded like. By the time I turned 27, I was still living under their roof. Not because I wanted to, but because rent was impossible on my salary, and they knew it. My mother called it helping me get back on my feet, but in reality, it was just another leash. I worked long shifts at a warehouse, paid most of the utility bills, and still got treated like an ungrateful guest. Every night, Ethan would waltz in late, toss his jacket on the couch, and my mom would beam at him like he'd just won a medal. Then she'd look at me and say, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" The resentment simmered quietly until one evening, it finally boiled over. I came home exhausted, still in my work boots, and found Ethan sprawled on the couch watching TV. The sink was piled high with dishes, my dishes from breakfast that morning. I asked him to help out for once, and before I knew it, he was laughing, telling Mom I was throwing a tantrum again. She stormed in, wagging her finger in my face. "You always start. Drama. You can't even do one simple thing without whining." Something in me just snapped. Years of swallowing insults, years of pretending it didn't hurt, all of it erupted at once. "I'm done," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm moving out. I can't live like this anymore." For a second, there was silence. Then, laughter. Not nervous laughter, cruel laughter. My mom actually wiped tears from her eyes as she said, You can't even manage your own life. You'd be back here in a week." Ethan smirked, adding, "Don't forget your mom's cooking when you're starving." That night, I lay awake replaying their words over and over. It stung, but beneath the humiliation, there was a spark of something else. Anger, maybe even determination. If they thought I couldn't survive without them, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, still hearing their laughter in my head. I didn't have much, just a few boxes of clothes, my laptop, and the little savings I'd scraped together from overtime pay. My hands were trembling as I packed, not because I was scared of leaving, but because for once, I was actually following through. My mother watched from the doorway, sipping her coffee like she was watching a comedy. "You'll be back," she said, not even looking up from her phone. I didn't respond. I just grabbed my bag and walked out. The air outside felt heavier than I expected, like freedom came with its own kind of weight. I found a small, cheap apartment across town, barely big enough for a bed and a table. The walls were stained, the heater barely worked, and the only sound at night was the humming of the fridge. But it was mine. No shouting, no footsteps pacing outside my door, no guilt waiting at the kitchen table. The first few weeks were brutal. Instant noodles for dinner, walking to work because I couldn't afford gas, and constantly wondering if I'd made a mistake. There were moments when I almost called home, just to hear a familiar voice, but then I'd remember how they laughed when I said I'd leave. That thought alone kept me going. One night, I sat on the floor eating cold leftovers, staring at my half-furnished apartment. It was quiet, lonely, sure, but also peaceful. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to apologize for existing. I realized peace wasn't supposed to be loud or perfect. It was supposed to feel like this. Mine, fragile, but finally real. And deep down, I knew I'd rather struggle in silence than ever go back to being their scapegoat again. It didn't take long for them to notice I was serious. At first, there was silence. No calls, no messages, nothing. I thought maybe they were finally letting me go, but 2 weeks later, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Missed calls from Mom, then from Dad, then even from Ethan. I ignored them, but the messages got louder, more desperate. "We're worried about you. You can't just disappear like this." But I could hear the manipulation hiding between the lines. They weren't worried. They were losing control. When I didn't respond, they started showing up where they knew I'd be. One afternoon, as I was unloading boxes at work, I saw Mom standing outside the warehouse gates, arms crossed. She said she just happened to be in the area. I told her I was busy, but she insisted I come home for dinner. When I said no, her face hardened. "You think you're too good for your family now?" she hissed. I walked away before my anger said something I couldn't take back. Later that night, Ethan texted, "You're being dramatic. Mom's worried sick. Just come home." I almost laughed. Worried sick? The same woman who used to call me a failure now suddenly missed me? The irony was suffocating. Still, I gave in and called once, just to end the harassment. The moment she heard my voice, Mom started crying, saying, "I just want my family back." For a second, I almost believed her. But then, like clockwork, she slipped in. "Don't forget who raised you, who sacrificed for you." The warmth in her tone vanished. It wasn't love. It was leverage. After that call, I blocked their numbers. My chest ached, but the silence that followed felt sacred. I realized they didn't miss me. They missed having someone to blame. It didn't take long for them to notice I was serious. At first, there was silence. No calls, no messages, nothing. I thought maybe they were finally letting me go. But 2 weeks later, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Missed calls from Mom, then from Dad, then even from Ethan. I ignored them, but the messages got louder, more desperate. "We're worried about you. You can't just disappear like this." But I could hear the manipulation hiding between the lines. They weren't worried. They were losing control. When I didn't respond, they started showing up where they knew I'd be. One afternoon, as I was unloading boxes at work, I saw Mom standing outside the warehouse gates, arms crossed. She said she just happened to be in the area. I told her I was busy, but she insisted I come home for dinner. When I said no, her face hardened. You think you're too good for your family now? She hissed. I walked away before my anger said something I couldn't take back. Later that night, Ethan texted, "You're being dramatic. Mom's worried sick. Just come home." I almost laughed. Worried sick? The same woman who used to call me a failure now suddenly missed me? The irony was suffocating. Still, I gave in and called once, just to end the harassment. The moment she heard my voice, Mom started crying, saying, "I just want my family back." For a second, I almost believed her. But then, like clockwork, she slipped in. "Don't forget who raised you, who sacrificed for you." The warmth in her tone vanished. It wasn't love, it was leverage. After that call, I blocked their numbers. My chest ached, but the silence that followed felt sacred. I realized they didn't miss me. They missed having someone to blame. A full year passed before I realized how much I'd changed. The exhaustion that used to sit on my shoulders every morning was gone. I'd gotten promoted to shift supervisor, nothing glamorous, but for someone who'd been called a disappointment his whole life, it felt like a miracle. My small apartment started to look like a real home. Clean walls, a thrifted couch, even a few plants I somehow managed not to kill. Every piece of it reminded me that I'd built this life from nothing. For months, I stayed completely silent with my family. No calls, no texts, no visits. I thought maybe they'd moved on too. But one afternoon, while scrolling through social media, I saw Ethan post a picture from a family dinner, captioned, "So proud of my little brother for finally getting his life together. We always knew he'd make it." My stomach twisted. They were taking credit for it. The same people who laughed when I left were now pretending they'd supported me all along. I ignored it, but more messages followed. First Mom, then Dad. "We're so proud of you. You've proven us right. Family always sticks together." Every line reeked of ownership, not pride. I didn't reply, but I could feel their narrative forming, rewriting the past to make themselves look good. Then came Ethan's voice message. His tone was calm, almost friendly. "Hey man, I know we had our differences, but Mom misses you. You should stop by sometime. She talks about you all the time." I listened twice, trying to detect any trace of sincerity. There wasn't any, just guilt wrapped in nostalgia. Still, something about his words lingered. "She talks about you all the time." It didn't sound like pride. It sounded like planning. And deep down, I knew. Silence only works as revenge until they decide to use it against you. A few weeks later, I got a message from Ethan again. "Mom wants to have a small dinner. No drama, just family catching up." I stared at it for a long time, my gut screaming, "Don't go." But there was a part of me, some leftover foolish hope, that still wondered if things could ever be different. Maybe they really missed me. Maybe the silence had made them think. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I pulled into the driveway, the same house looked smaller somehow. The porch light flickered, and I noticed how chipped the paint was on the front door. I could smell Mom's cooking before I even knocked. Roast chicken, just like she used to make when I was a kid. For a moment, it almost felt like nostalgia. But the second she opened the door, smiling too wide, I remembered who she really was. Dinner started fine. Awkward small talk, a few laughs that didn't reach anyone's eyes. They asked about my job, my apartment, even complimented how grown up I looked. For a few fleeting minutes, I almost let myself believe it was genuine. But then Mom leaned in, her voice soft. "You're doing so well, sweetheart. We always knew you'd make it big someday." Her hand brushed mine. "Actually, we could really use your help right now." I froze. The tone shift was instant. like a switch flipping. She started explaining how Dad's small business was struggling, how Ethan had run into some bad luck, how the house might even be at risk. Every sentence tightened around me like a noose. Ethan avoided my eyes as she said, "You're the only one we can count on." It hit me then. This wasn't a reunion. It was an ambush dressed as forgiveness. And I realized with a sick twist in my gut that I hadn't been invited home out of love. I'd been summoned out of convenience. The room went quiet after her words, the kind of silence that feels too heavy to breathe through. My fork was still halfway to my mouth when I set it down. "You invited me here to ask for money," I said flatly. Mom blinked, pretending to be offended. "Don't make it sound like that. We're family. Families help each other." Something inside me snapped, an anger years in the making. "You mean the same family that laughed when I said I was leaving? The one that called me a failure every day? The family that told me I'd come crawling back?" My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. "You don't want my help? You want my obedience again." Mom's face twisted, her fake warmth disappearing. "How dare you talk to me like that after everything I've done for you?" she hissed. Dad muttered something about keeping the peace, but his eyes stayed fixed on the table. Ethan tried to intervene, saying, "Come on, man, don't make this a scene." I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. A scene? This whole dinner was a performance. You don't miss me. You miss control. Mom stood up, tears already forming. "I raised you, I fed you, I gave you everything," she shouted. I met her gaze, steady this time. "No, Mom. You gave me guilt. You gave me fear. And you taught me to think love meant earning my right to exist." For a moment, no one moved. Even Ethan looked pale. Then I grabbed my coat and stood. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was release. As I walked toward the door, I heard her say, "If you leave now, don't bother coming back." I turned just enough to meet her eyes and said quietly, "I already left years ago. Tonight just made it official." Then I stepped out into the cold night air that felt more like home than that house ever did. The drive back to my apartment that night felt endless. Streetlights blurred past like smears of gold in the rain, and my chest felt hollow. I should have felt proud for standing up for myself, but all I felt was grief. I'd finally said what needed to be said, yet the silence that followed cut deeper than their insults ever did. When I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed and realized I didn't have a family anymore. Not really. Days blurred together after that. Work kept me distracted, but every quiet moment felt heavier. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, wondering if maybe they'd apologize, maybe admit they were wrong. But every time I checked, there was nothing, just emptiness. Then, 2 weeks later, I got a message from Ethan. Just one line. "Dad's in the hospital. Mom says it's your fault." My stomach dropped. I called immediately, but no one answered. When I finally reached the hospital, Mom wouldn't even look at me. She muttered that Dad had a mild heart attack after everything I'd put him through. I stood there, frozen, guilt ripping through me even though I knew it wasn't fair. She turned to Ethan and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "He only cares about himself. He broke this family." The nurses stared, pitying me like I really was the villain she painted me to be. That night, I sat in my car outside the hospital, hands gripping the steering wheel until they went numb. I'd left to save myself, but somehow, they still found a way to make me the bad guy. For the first time since leaving, I cried. Not the angry kind, just tired, helpless sobs that left me hollow. I had escaped their house, but I couldn't escape the chains they'd built in my head. And in that dark parking lot, it hit me. I wasn't free yet. Not even close. The morning after that breakdown, I sat in my apartment, staring at the sunlight creeping through the blinds. My eyes were swollen, my head heavy, but my mind was clear for the first time in years. I finally saw the pattern, how every moment of my life had been controlled by guilt and obligation. They didn't love me for who I was. They loved the version of me that made them comfortable, the one who stayed quiet and obedient. That day, I did something small but powerful. I wrote everything down. Every insult, every manipulation, every moment they made me feel worthless. I filled pages until my hand cramped. Seeing it all on paper was like ripping the mask off a monster. It wasn't me who was broken. It was them. Over the next few weeks, I started therapy. My therapist told me something that stuck. You can't heal in the same place that hurt you. It felt like a punch to the chest, because that's exactly what I'd been trying to do. Fix my pain by seeking their approval. So I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. I started running after work, clearing my head 1 mile at a time. I cooked real meals, learned to enjoy silence again, and even made a few friends who didn't make me feel small for existing. I began to rebuild myself, not out of rebellion, but out of love for the version of me that survived. One night, I looked around my little apartment, now warm, alive, and mine, and realized something. I didn't need them to see my worth anymore. I finally did. And for the first time, when my phone lit up with Mom's name, I didn't flinch. I just let it ring. Months passed, and life slowly started to feel normal. I was sleeping better, eating better, even laughing again. I'd cut off almost all contact with my family, except for the occasional text from Ethan, which I rarely answered. Then, one evening after work, I came home to a voicemail from my mother. Her tone was different this time. Not angry, not guilt-tripping, just tired. "We need to talk. Please call me." I didn't. But a few days later, she called again, her voice shaking. "Ethan's in trouble. He got mixed up in some investment thing. He lost everything. We might lose the house." She paused, waiting for my reaction, then added softly, "You're the only one doing well now. We could really use your help." I sat there listening, realizing how the cycle was trying to repeat itself. They had burned every bridge, and now that the water was rising, they wanted me to be the raft. For a moment, I felt that old tug of responsibility. The part of me that still craved their approval, whispering, "Maybe this is your chance to fix things." But then I remembered the hospital, the shouting, the laughter when I said I'd leave. They never wanted me back. They just wanted what I could give them. So I called her back, calmly this time. "Mom," I said, "I forgive you. I really do. But I can't save you anymore." There was silence on the other end, then a quiet, stunned breath. "So that's it?" she asked. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "That's it." When I hung up, I expected to feel guilt. But instead, there was only stillness. The kind of peace that comes from finally ending a storm you didn't start. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to win their approval. I had won my freedom. A year has passed since that last call, and sometimes I still catch myself thinking about them, wondering if they're okay, if Ethan ever learned anything from what happened. But the difference now is that those thoughts don't control me anymore. I don't ache for their validation. I don't dream about fixing something that was never mine to fix. I've accepted that not every story with family ends in reconciliation. Some end in self-preservation. My life is quiet, but it's mine. I've made a small circle of friends who feel more like family than the people I was born to. We cook together on weekends, share our struggles without judgment, and when they say, "We're proud of you," it doesn't sound like manipulation, it sounds like love. My apartment, once a symbol of isolation, has become a home filled with warmth and laughter. Every now and then, my phone still lights up with my mother's number. I never delete it. I just let it ring. The calls used to come daily, then weekly, and now, barely once a month. I imagine her sitting at the old kitchen table, realizing the control she once had is gone. Maybe one day she'll really understand what she lost. One evening, as I watched the sunset from my balcony, the same thought came back to me. The one that started it all. Peace. Back then, it felt like an impossible dream. Now it's my reality. They laughed when I said I'd move out. They told everyone I'd fail. But the truth is, I didn't just survive without them. I became someone they could never break again. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I smiled to myself, finally understanding. Sometimes walking away isn't revenge. It's freedom.